Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the Rushcliffe series. This is the southernmost district in Nottinghamshire and it contains 59 civil parishes of England. And there's some corkers down here. Let's dive in and check one out. Hello folks, welcome back to Rushcliffe once again on another dark, cold February morning. I'm hoping this becomes less of a theme as we head through this series. It should do, it should do. Right, we're beginning this one next to two major landmarks. You can see behind me there, we have a river. That is the River Soar. And in front of me, we've got an equally impressive landmark. This one is man-made though, it's not a river. It is a viaduct. There we go. We're going to talk about both of these two things as we start our very short journey around this place, because it's not a very big one. This is Stanford-on-Soar. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Stanford-on-Soar, stone ford on the flowing river. This week in Rushcliffe we find ourselves back on the banks of the River Soar as we take on Stanford. By ticking this one off the list, we've now been to both the northern and southern extremities of Nottinghamshire. Stanford-on-Soar is the most southerly place in the county, and it's generally associated more with Loughborough than it is with Nottingham. In fact, the village is located just 1 mile to the north of the Leicestershire town. Marking the boundary is of course the river, but the village also has a major railway landmark at the boundary, the impressive Stanford Viaduct, a colossal structure with several arches that span both the river and the main road. Stanford is one of the smallest villages in Nottinghamshire, possessing as it does a handful of houses along one main street between the River Soar and a junction to Normanton. There are some other buildings further afield however, including an old school. The most notable though is the massive Stanford Hall, a Grade 1 listed country house. Quite a few important people have lived in that property over the centuries, but since 2011, the hall and its grounds have been occupied by the British Armed Forces. Let's talk about all of that and more as we take on an early morning stroll through another lovely village here in Rushcliffe. We start our walk above the River Soar at what is the southernmost tip of Nottinghamshire. The river forms the boundary with Leicestershire at this point, although having said that, it's a border that's anything but logical. Parcels of land on either side of the river belong to the opposing county, but in essence, the Soar is the point where Nottinghamshire ends. It's also the last time we'll see this river in Rushcliffe. Spanning both the river and Meadow Lane, the road which crosses it, is the enormous Stanford Viaduct, a feat of railway engineering like none other in the district. Stanford Viaduct was built in 1899 as part of the Great Central Railway's London extension, which opened in the same year. It's built of blue brick and was constructed by the contractor Henry Lovett of Wolverhampton. Its three central arches are different to the others. They are purposely skewed to allow the Soar to pass underneath. I've seen this described online as a beautiful man-made addition to the surrounding natural landscape. I mean, it's not wrong, is it? The Soar and the Viaducts are about a quarter of a mile away from the village itself, which we are now entering. The next landmark is the church, located at the southern end of the main street. This one is dedicated to St John the Baptist and it's Grade 1 listed. This has its origins in the 13th century, and although some architecture remains from that time, St John's underwent a significant restoration in 1893. It's within the Anglican diocese of Southerly and Nottingham, and it's notable also for being the most southerly parish in the ecclesiastical province of York. St John's forms part of a joint benefice with the neighbouring parishes of Costock, Eastleek, Westleek and Rempston. Just outside the church is the village sign, a lovely wooden painted effort made by a man named Dennis Parrott. The sign commemorates the Golden Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth II in 2002. As you can see, next to it is a postbox. Stanford has two of those, one here and one on Leek Lane. There's no shop in the village, but there is a bus service. At this stop opposite the church, you can catch the number 1, which runs from Nottingham to Loughborough. Beyond the stop, we're into some housing, found mainly in clumps along the main street. Village Farm is a good example. Towards the middle of civilization, you come to a triangle of land containing a small community garden with a canopy, not too dissimilar to ones we've seen before. Get your cards out because this is where the parish notice board is located. That's 13 down in Rushcliffe now and 46 to go. Behind the garden is this building. I have no idea though what this is, or indeed was. It looks like a former chapel of some kind, but if it is, there's no records about it. It's not a listed building either. Stanford has 16 of those, 9 in the village itself, 6 in the grounds of Stanford Hall and the hall itself. Next we have Stanford House, an imposing building that's used as an office for radio equipment manufacturer MRTC. They specialise in motorsport and have worked with numerous household name racing series, including Formulas 1, 2 and 3, the British Touring Car Championship, Rallycross and MotoGP. Stanford House is the most expensive property here, last valued at well over £1.2 million, but you can't deny some others must be up there with it. We've reached the end of the village now, where we meet the road to Normanton and the chain ferry, 1.5 miles away. Now, Stanford-on-Soar is a linear village, which means there's no way to form a circle back to the start. I've basically got to walk back the way I've already come. But it's okay, because it wasn't all that far anyway. So I'm going to trudge back to the viaduct. When I reach the car, I'm going to hop in it, and we're going to head up towards the north of the village, because there's one big thing we still haven't covered, and that would be Stanford Hall. And that's got a rather interesting use these days. Let's check it out. To get to Stanford Hall, we first have to drive up Leek Lane, and it's a long way. No matter though, because on the way there's another landmark of interest. Keep your eyes on the right of shot, because we're about to pass Stanford's former school, originally built in 1895. It's a surprisingly large building considering the size of the village. Now no longer in use as a school, the beautiful building with its gorgeous green and white trim has been converted into residential use. Stanford's school children these days either go to nearby Costock or Eastleek or into Loughborough. The road continues for another half a mile or so before you pass one of the entrances to Stanford Hall. We, though, are making for the main entrance on Melton Road. Even then, getting into the hall and its grounds requires some pre-authorisation these days because of its current use. Stanford Hall is an 18th century country house located to the northeast of the village, surrounded by a huge parkland. It's no longer lived in by a family of landed gentry, but it used to be. The first to occupy the property was Charles Vere Dashwood. He commissioned the architect William Anderson of Loughborough to rebuild an old manor house in brick between 1771 and 1774. He came up with Stanford Hall. Built over 2 stories with a 7-bay frontage, the property descended in the Dashwood family until 1887, when it was sold to Richard Ratcliffe, a brewer from Burton-on-Trent. Ratcliffe employed local architect W.H. Fletcher to make substantial changes to the house, which included building new two-storey wings flanking the main block and a new service wing. The house passed on his death in 1898 to his son, and in 1928 it was his granddaughter Kathleen who found herself the owner, married at the time to Lawrence Kimball. That same year, Sir Julian Carn purchased the hall from the Kimballs, and he commissioned Percy Richard Morley Horder to build several other features in its grounds. These included a cricket pitch, a 9-hole golf course, tennis courts, and an enormous outdoor heated swimming pool with coral walls. I think you could say it was more than a little extravagant. The largest addition was a theatre, the walls of which were decorated with murals by Beatrice McDermott. It comprised a raked auditorium, orchestra pit and Wurlitzer organ, which could be raised and lowered during performances. The house was extensively remodelled over the next decade under the direction of Sir Charles Allen. By the 1940s, it was one of the finest and most luxurious of small country houses in the UK. Carn died in 1944 when part of the house was being used for the rehabilitation of wounded soldiers. Stanford Hall still retains most of the superb interior structures and installations of Carn's day, but these days it has a very different use. In 1945, the hall was sold to the Cooperative Union to house its college. They occupied the property until 2001, when they relocated to Manchester. For a time afterwards, ownership of the hall bounced around in the hands of various property developers, including Rainsway Properties and Czech White Industries. There were plans to turn it into a retirement village or luxury apartments, but these never materialised. In 2011, its current owners stepped in. Stanford Hall is now an integral part of the Ministry of Defence. In October 2011, the hall and its grounds were purchased on behalf of Gerald Grosvenor, the 6th Duke of Westminster, as a potential site for a defence and national rehabilitation centre. The Duke, who served in the Territorial Army since the age of 20 and was committed to supporting military welfare, led a major fundraising campaign to cover the capital costs of the proposed new establishment. Rushcliffe Borough Council then granted planning permission for the redevelopment of the Stanford Hall estate, and work started on what was a £300 million project in 2015. The 7th Duke of Westminster handed over the facility to the nation at a gifting ceremony held on the estate in 2018, and the centre was received by the then Prime Minister Theresa May in the presence of the Duke of Cambridge. As part of the MOD, you can well imagine the place is very secure and off limits to anyone who doesn't have authorisation to be here. That's why the entrance and the gatehouse, staffed by soldiers in full army gear no less, was all like a capture. Time to move on. That's been Stanford on Soar. See you again in Rushcliffe next week. Thanks for watching this video, folks. Don't forget to like this episode if you haven't already. It really makes a difference with YouTube. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us a share too if you've got friends who'd like it. You can find all the links to my social media accounts below, as well as my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can donate to the channel. Also, if you've enjoyed this episode, have a look at some more videos in this series. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.